What if one of the West Coast's most powerful exports is not technology, it's taste? Because for decades, the West Coast hasn't just built companies, it's shaped culture, music, identity, film, Hollywood, the way people experience the world. And yet, in the age of Netflix and TikTok and Spotify, algorithmic recommendations are taking over, and the role of setting culture is feeling under threat. Playlists are generated, discovery is outsourced, and culture starts to feel less like something we actively create, something we participate in, and more like something that happens to us passively. But there's a countercurrent. Broadcasting out of Seattle and now San Francisco, KEXP has become something quietly remarkable, a human powered alternative to algorithmic radio with a global audience that stretches far beyond the West Coast. This isn't just a radio station, it's a cultural engine, a place where DJs, yes, human DJs, still matter, where music enthusiasts show up to discover new artists, new sounds, and new genre. So today's question is bigger than music. What does it mean for the West Coast to export culture in an algorithmic age? Thanks for being with us in Pacific Time. I'm Greg Ammerfelt, and I'm here with my co host, Ashley Brown. Today's guest is Ethan Raup, the CEO of KEXP. Ethan's got an executive's mind and an artist's heart. He works from a very cool office, cafe, and performing space that's literally right in the shadow of Seattle's Space Needle. Ethan runs the station where he's been for a decade. He steered KEXP through massive digital growth and, more recently, a bold expansion into the San Francisco Bay Area. We talk about the importance of human DJs, what it means to be hyperlocal and global at the same time, and why independent media has never been so important. I kicked us off by asking Ethan to go back in time, back into the vaults, and unpack the KEXP origin story from its days as a college radio station.
Yeah, a good question. We come out of the University of Washington, 1972. We were a college radio station, originally with the call letters KCMU, which stood for the Communications Building, where we started. And, I think it was pretty much a low power FM for many, many years. So if you didn't really live on the campus or in the immediate vicinity, it was pretty hard to get KCMU. And those were, of course, before the days of streaming. But it developed a cult following, going all the way back. And what I would say is that sort of independent ethos and creative spirit that was alive and well and still is with college radio is absolutely at the core of who we are. There's nothing automated or pre-programmed about anything we do. Just live human DJs who connect with people through their personalities and great storytelling and who know how to put together kick-ass sets of music that are alive and vital and fully in the moment. And so we have been able to build around that global audience of music lovers with a really strong base, obviously, here in Seattle, a growing base in the Bay Area now, but really a strong global audience of people who are looking for community and connection and great music. I'll just say one final thing in introducing ourselves, Greg. The model for commercial music radio has been and is completely broken, and that is separate from trends in digital media and streaming. You can only listen to so many ads in an hour without going crazy, and you can only listen to the same song so many times without the life being completely sucked out of even really great songs. And who wants to listen to that crap, honestly? In some cases, that approach to programming has bled over into the non-commercial space as well. And so one of the lessons, I've been here now for 12 years in different roles. One of the lessons I learned, and before I had no experience in music or in public media. So I had a lot to learn when I started. And one of the first lessons John Richards, who is our morning show host, taught me is that it's really easy to put together an eclectic music station that no one wants to listen to. And that also is true, and so there's a really important approach and distinction that we take that involves a couple things. One is curiosity, and not arrogance, and so we're not trying to look down our noses at anybody and and preen around thinking we have the secret to what is cool in the culture and the music in any given moment. It's really kind of wide-eyed curiosity about what's going on and sharing things that we like. And the other is I guess related to that, but is playing for an audience, and not playing for yourself, not showing off, but thinking about the audience and what they want to hear. And that relates to the music, but it also relates to how we connect with people in the moment and storytelling and opening up to our community who regularly check in with our DJs. That's part of the whole experience. And the storytelling that goes along with it, just saying hello and checking in from wherever you are in the world, is a really important part of who we are, and it really becomes kind of a big extended family. And so that deeper connection that we have with our audience is something that, I think a lot of non-commercial and public media have a little bit to learn from in some cases, and we feel really good about. And it speaks to staying true to who we are over the years, but also having some degree of ambition to make a bigger difference in the world and reach more people, and get more great music. Support artists and get more great music out there.
Okay, Ethan, impossible question right up front. You get the chance to interact with all kinds of incredible artists. Many of them come through and play live shows at KXP. What is your number one personal highlight?
Okay, so thank you, Greg. I'll answer that two ways. One is more general, and then one is more specific. The more general answer is that in the time I've been here, just listening day in and day out, it's changed my life. And if you don't know KXP, if you're new to us, it does take some time. You're not going to like everything that you hear that we play. And that's intentional. What I would say is that, this is like my teenage kids, or when they were teenagers, they kind of dragged me kicking and screaming into the world of hip hop. And thank God they did. It's just like it opened up whole new worlds for me, and I'm eternally grateful to both of them for doing that. And it's a daily, journey listening to KXP. And so if you are curious and open and interested in, whole new worlds, this is one way to really engage with what's going on, in the whole flow of life that's happening around us at any given time. So that's one way. It's just like personally, it's changed my life.
Hmm.
More specifically, and probably the question you were really asking, Greg, uh, highlight has to be meeting very briefly, but meeting Tom York. He and Johnny Greenwood came through with a smile a few years ago. I guess when they put out their first album, and so they did it in studio. And I am a Radiohead fan, and that was pretty cool.
Well, then what's your favorite Radiohead song?
Probably Pyramid. I mean, if I could take half of Kid A and half of Amnesiac and put it together, it would be hands down my favorite album. As it is, In Rainbows is up there actually, maybe at or near the top, but probably say Pyramid.
Nice. Uh, I take that to mean that you are a serious music fan and also serious about music discovery and open to learning new things, which seems very much at the heart of KXP. And so I want to go back in time, and I know this predates your tenure at KXP, although I bet you know the lore. Going back to the KCMU days, and thinking about the way KCMU highlighted local bands in the Seattle area and became the conduit. I think it was one of the very first radio stations to play Nirvana and Soundgarden. How has KXP stayed in touch with that ethos of really connecting to new stuff and to highlighting the artists that people haven't necessarily heard of?
Yeah, you're right, Greg. It's a really important part of our history and who we've been and who we are, is having those deep ties to, different music scenes in and around Seattle and Puget Sound. I just learned this recently. There is a somewhat deep and lively conversation about which radio station was the first to actually play Nirvana. And Chaos down in Olympia, also a great radio station, I think maybe has claim to that. We certainly have a story of Kurt in the early days dropping off a single that they had just cut at the UW at KCMU, and then driving around our very small broadcast area waiting for it to get played, and it not getting played, of course. So he pulled over and called in the DJ and requested it, and so that was the first time we at least played it on the radio. um, Maybe the first time ever, maybe not, who cares. It's really important to have outlets like that. I mean, The Washington Music Nightlife Association last year did a survey of the whole state, and the survey is incredible. It was the first time for me when I saw it that it really kind of laid out all of the different aspects of what has to be working for a thriving music scene, and it includes a variety of different venues, from small to big, and everything in between. It includes promoters and labels and having access to cheap studio practice space. And you look back to the mid 80s, late 80s, early 90s, there are plenty of houses that were reasonably priced with basements and you could practice, and that's not really true anymore here. And so, there are different pieces of that ecosystem that have frayed over the years, and it's just very expensive healthcare. I mean, you name it. And they're big problems. Some are micro issues, some are macro issues. All to say, like, we're very conscious about playing a role in this ecosystem here and supporting emerging and local bands. It's tough. I'm fortunate enough to have some relationships and friendships and conversations with bands here and now also in Oakland and San Francisco. And, the amount of sacrifice and commitment that goes in to sticking with your art and your passion is just amazing. And so that is a big part of what we do. We regularly play local music, local Seattle music here. We're very conscious about that, about supporting local artists. I'll also say that, the work we're doing down in the Bay Area now has been so energizing and fascinating in different ways. And we'll probably dig into that here at some point. But all to say, you know, one of several reasons that we took that jump a couple years ago was we were aware still of the amazing music coming out of different scenes across the Bay Area. And even so, like how little we knew then based on what we know now, where we have hired DJs and staff who are actually in those scenes. And so you're hearing those bands more. We have a local show there, but also on the main broadcast. And it's great for those bands, but it's also great for our global audience. We're doing a better job of finding really, really great music in that community than we were able to before. And that's obviously still true here in Seattle.
Ethan, KEXP is, very well known. I mean, we touched on Nirvana, but it's very well known for launching local Pacific Northwest artists. Do you feel like that power still exists? That KEXP really does open doors for artists nationally and globally today, like it did 30 years ago?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much here, Ashley, honestly, but I suspect if you asked anyone involved with deep sea divers, just one sort of recent example, they would freely offer up that it's not because of KXP, of course, but we played a role in helping them reach a broader audience, and there's a great relationship there, just using that particular band as an example where, you know, we go out of our way and they go out of their way to continue the relationship, and so when they're releasing new music, you know, or doing a tour, they'll come through. And we take that very seriously and are really proud of our ability to help them. And that's just one example, of many. And Audio Oasis is our local show up here on Saturday nights, and we've started a couple years ago now doing Audio Oasis live. We cut away at the same time and do Vineland's live in the Bay Area. But it's a showcase for local bands. We're able to do it here in the gathering space in Seattle and the Bay Area. It rotates back and forth between venues in Oakland and San Francisco. But I'll tell you what, in both places, those showcases are packed. I was just down in Oakland and San Francisco for the last 10 days, and we had a Vineland's Live at the Stork Club in Oakland and two great local bands. It was packed and it was broadcast live on the radio. Maybe a month or so ago, we had an amazing Audio Oasis live here in the gathering space. Same thing, and so it just speaks to the commitment and I think the impact we're able to have staying connected with what's happening, both with younger and emerging acts, but also as they grow into, sort of a deep sea diver, bigger type of act.
And I'll widen the aperture to say I was at a Lumineers show this past summer. They were playing Seattle's Major League Baseball stadium, a huge show, and they highlighted that they broke out on KXP, and I think they played
Yeah,
their song "Ho Hey," and John Richards loved it, one of the DJs, and played it over and over and over again on air for a couple days. And that they
yep,
credit with really launching them to national and now international notoriety. So, and they're a band from Denver and New Jersey. So it's not
right.
just Seattle and the Bay Area that
No, it's
KXP is
not. It's
highlighting.
not at all. It's not at all. But another example in that same space, Greg, is Head and Heart.
Hmm.
They just came through, and I think were playing their first album straight through at some large local venue here. Or may have been the Paramount. But they came through, and we played a big role early on with them, which I think also they would freely acknowledge. I don't think I'm taking undue credit, but it's another good example of among many, many. And to your point, some of them are local here, some of them are local in the Bay Area. Many of them are just great bands that we find out in the world. We have two full-time staff who do nothing but listen to music. And also, and so I mean, it's interesting. Like, I mean, I don't know how many other radio stations make that kind of investment, but two people with really good ears who do nothing all day but listen to new music. And we also, there are pros and cons to technology and where we are in the world. And I'm happy to talk about some of the cons. But one of the pros is we have a system set up now where in the past, when it was on vinyl or CDs, every Friday you'd update rotation, so the new music once a week would get loaded in. Now it's instantaneous, so if Chris Sainley or Alex Reuter find something, they'll put it in a folder and the DJs have immediate access to it, so our ability to find great music and get it out in the world is awesome.
So those two folks who listen to music all day, that's the art. How do you use listener data and feedback that you get from your audience to also guide those decisions? Like, what does that art and science mix look like?
Heavily leaning toward the art is the truth. We do look at some metrics, but we do not chase demographics. And that's really, it gets back to the point I was making at the beginning of staying true to ourselves. I do believe that we have a responsibility even to lean in and make a bigger difference in the world, reach more people, engage with them more deeply. But the only way that matters and can make a difference is if we stay true to ourselves. And so we, we look at our own audience metrics probably not as seriously or as intensely as other non-commercial public media stations do, but we watch. We're definitely paying attention, but we're not choosing music to try to chase demographics. We have a set of programming guidelines and principles. There's also a culture I think that's developed amongst the DJs in terms of how to program that deals with quality control in a way that is much different than having a music director or one single person putting together what end up inevitably becoming dry and stale pre-programmed playlists. We give that creative freedom to our DJs. Um, and that's intentional. And a part of the answer to your question, Ashley, about how seriously to chase or to try to control where we're going with the art form.
There's a word that comes to mind, and it's kind of a highfalutin word out of winemaking, which is terroir, and it refers to, the mineral content of the soil and the vegetation nearby and the air quality and the water quality, and those all contribute to a certain flavor. So putting aside the highfalutin word,
Yeah.
what explains why KXP can only exist in the Northwest and the Bay Area?
Well, I don't think it does only exist in the Northwest and the Bay Area. I mean, we grew out of the Northwest, and so that is who we are. Our roots run deep here, and they always will. The Bay Area connection is interesting, and we can talk about that if you want. But the truth is, our DJs for decades now have gotten used to speaking from Seattle to the entire world. And so I'm not even going to try to pronounce that word, Greg. My French is not very good, but I love the idea behind it. And I do think that there is, in terms of the water and the air and the soil and the feel, it's clearly there's a basis in the Northwest. But when you're listening to the morning show or to any of our daytime shows, you know, you're hearing people checking in from all over the world. You know, I this morning, John, I was listening on the way in, and some fellow from Manchester, you know, with some crazy funny story. He's in a movie and was like covered in raspberry flavored blood stuff for this movie that he was doing, and it was Winnie the Pooh related too, which is kind of weird and also funny. But he requested Prince's raspberry beret. You know what I mean? And it's. Am I allowed to swear on this?
Yes.
I can swear on this. It's fucking hilarious, you know? And then a couple days ago when I was still in San Francisco, I woke up and was also listening to the morning show, and, you know, John had gotten an email from someone who self-identified as Hispanic and Latina, and she had had to move from the West Coast to the Midwest for family reasons to help with a family medical issue is how I remember it, and is struggling there, afraid to go out. You know what I mean? Like afraid to go out and about, and was saying in her email to John how important it was to be able to, you know, be a part of the KXP community on a regular basis. And you know, so sometimes you laugh and sometimes you want to cry, you know, but it's a part of the whole human condition, you know. And so yeah, it's definitely rooted in Seattle. That will always be the case, and that flavor shows up in different ways. But also, we're tapping into something that transcends just one place, I think, you know, and speaks to the broader human condition. And I'm just grateful, honestly, you know, I'm just grateful to be a part of it.
I wanna dig into that global reach for just a second and go, like, one click deeper. In researching, for this show, you have 4,000,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is staggering. Was building that digital footprint or that global footprint, was that something that you intentionally set out to do, or did you sort of stumble into that massive online reach?
Mostly stumbled into, I think, is the honest answer. There was definitely intention involved, but Jim Beckman and Scott Holpinen uh, you know, started this program as volunteers going back to, geez, I want to say probably somewhere in the 2000s, maybe earlier rather than later. You know, we had already had bands coming through and doing live sessions on air. That was a thing that was common, and the two of them, and probably a few others, but definitely Jim and Scott, started with their own money and their own time taping and videotaping these sessions, and so they deserve an enormous amount of credit for having the vision and the foresight to do that, truthfully, because that. I mean, it seems obvious now, but at that time, it was not obvious, you know. And they really saw an opportunity and ran with it, which I hope still speaks to who we are as an organization. That there is still space, you know, for that kind of creativity. To make a difference in the world when you see opportunities, but at any rate, others involved in the organization at that time, which has nothing to do with me, just to be clear. But, you know, Kevin Cole and Tom Mara and Chris Kellogg and others saw what was happening and invested in it. And so they also deserve credit for that. And so we've learned a lot and also, you know, have been at it longer than most, which speaks actually to the size of the audience and the impact. But it also, I may be veering off here from your question, but it also speaks to the quality of what that video team and also our audio engineers are doing. I mean, you know, part of it is we've been at it so long, and who we are now, we're getting bands through that are just absolutely fantastic. But always there has been an attention to quality and detail in the video and videography and also the audio quality.
There's so many stories about uh, artists, organizations that encounter success, and it undoes what explained their success to begin with.
Yeah.
How has KXP held on to its intimacy with listeners? The idea of a DJ, an artist, and and one listener at the other end, in spite of the fact that you now have billions of views.
It's a great question, Greg, and it's something we really have to pay attention to, honestly. You know, as any organization, not just us, any organization gets bigger, has success, like you say, I can see it happening here where you hire more people who are good at more things, but also you lose that scrappiness, or at least there's a risk of losing that scrappiness, the willingness to try shit, and take risks. And also the more people that you hire, the more reasons you have from smart people to say no to things. And that drives me crazy. Grinding good ideas into dust is what I call it. And that's natural. It's not just here, it's in any organization. But you have to fight against it, as a leader, and as a leadership team around me, but also throughout the organization, and awareness that this is something that happens and we can't do everything. And also there are bad ideas that deserve, some critical thinking. But, you know, also taking some risk, trying shit, seeing what works. And so when it comes to, just to use the videos as an example, we're not out there right now trying to figure out how to get the biggest bands booked into our studio. That's not what we're doing. I mean, we just had Queens of the Stone Age in earlier this week. Unfortunately, I was in San Francisco. I missed it, but incredible band. I can't wait to see the session. Huge band. Um, but also most of the bands that come through here, I've never heard of. You know what I mean? And and they're awesome. That's one of the great benefits of this job and of working here is like walking by that studio for sound check or when they're actually doing an in studio and it's like, wow.
Mm.
And so, I said earlier, the only way that we can have a bigger impact in the world, and the only way it makes sense for us to have some ambition to do more is if we stay true to ourselves. I mean, that is the key. And so Jim Beckman, I mentioned earlier, he is primarily responsible for booking those bands. And God bless Jim. He's surrounded by a lot of other people who are creative. None of them answer to me. None of them answer to label relationships, or relationships out in the music community. It's what we think is good. It's what our programming team thinks is good. And so, I think I think that gets at the answer, Greg, but it has to be a constant struggle or you risk, sliding into mediocrity.
Yeah, and this theme keeps coming up as we talk to people up and down the West Coast. I mean, I think our region has a deserved reputation for innovation and for risk taking. So, I mean, you mentioned the video of the live sessions, Ethan, but what's a very recent risk you've decided to take that it's kind of on the edge, like it could really work or it could really
I
fail.
I'll answer your question honestly. The reason that I was in San Francisco for 11 days is that we had a week-long broadcast last week, called Spin Around the Bay, where John and Cheryl, our morning show and midday show hosts, went to a different neighborhood independent record store every day and broadcasted live, which was great. And so we've been doing things like that pretty regularly in the last 2 years since we've been broadcasting there, and we try to kind of pack a lot into those weeks. The reason I stayed down with a couple of my colleagues, Betsy and Chris Kellogg, is that we're looking at a permanent space right now in the Bay Area. So that's been going well enough that we feel it's earlier than probably we would want, but there's an interesting opportunity. A nonprofit, San Francisco Heritage, uh, came into ownership of a building a few years ago. One of the buildings on the corner of Haight and Ashbury. And they are really interested in the vision and mission, and really energizing that building in a way that stays true to the last owner, but also to the neighborhood and to what that whole legacy means. Obviously, we don't have a direct tie into that legacy, but you don't have to look very hard, below the surface to see a lot of really important connections. And so right now we're looking at it. And I don't know. I mean, there was we had a lot of really good meetings over the last 11, 12 days. We had a great public one that we organized, one that was organized by San Francisco Heritage, two great public meetings. It's an expensive project. We're trying to make sure that we've got a solid vision for it and that we can actually pull it off. There are a lot of people in the Bay Area who care about that legacy and that particular corner and who want to see something like this. Is that an opportunity to propel the work of the organization generally and also in the Bay Area forward? Or is it biting off a little too much and maybe a little bit out of our, strike zone in terms of who we are and what Haight-Ashbury means and that legacy? These are all questions we're asking ourselves, but it is a very live example of us looking at something that could be, I mean, not a crazy, we're not going to do it if we think it's a crazy risk, but it would be a risk for sure. And also it could be kind of amazing.
Well, we'll be listening closely to hear how that one goes. It sounds exciting.
It has struck me as you've told this story, from college radio station to making the leap to KEXP to early adoption of online and being an early player in YouTube. It struck me that you're very comfortable exploring adjacent spaces early, it sounds like, and you've built a culture, that does value sort of, well thought risk taking. I'm gonna go out there, crazy out there. There's no VH1 anymore, there's no MTV anymore. Could we one day see a KEXP streaming television channel or like something adjacent in that space, like an online streamer or something similar, something visual?
Good question, Ashley. I mean, we're very careful about our relationships with the artists and with the bands. Excuse me, the, the labels. And in most cases, we don't have the rights to use the in studio sessions in the way that you're describing, and so that's a limiting factor. But also, I want to say, like, the approach that we take is what is good for reaching a broader audience in different ways in a landscape that's changing, media landscape and technology landscape that is changing rapidly. And so, one of you noted the 2 billion total views we've gotten on YouTube, which is a crazy number. It really is. And so, I expect that YouTube will continue to be a really important platform. We had a band that we recorded in December at Transmusic Hall, which is in Rennes, France, and is a music festival that we've been going to, I think, for 11 years in a row now. And the reason we've been going there is they do such an incredible job booking emerging artists. I think maybe mostly from Europe, but not exclusively. And at any rate, you both may have seen this. I'd be surprised if you hadn't. Angine de Poitrine. But Greg, maybe you're French. You can help me out a little bit with that. But at any rate, this is the duo, the French Canadian duo with the costumes and polka dots, and they're incredible. It's a spectacle, but also they're incredible musicians. And so in that particular case, Ashley, I haven't looked in the last week or so, but as of a couple weeks ago, we had 10 million views on YouTube. That was launched in early February. So 10 million views in a couple months, but also 7 or 8 million views on Instagram.
That's
And
amazing.
so but it is, but so, like, Instagram and TikTok, like, I'm not on either one personally, but, it's interesting. It's an area that I think you were trying to get at in terms of exploring ways to connect with different audiences with ultimately music discovery, and so, I don't know, like, broadcast television or streaming on some service, I'm not gonna say no, but there are more complications with, rights in some of those situations than in others on social media or on a platform that we have more control over and more, I guess, comfort with artists and labels.
We've been talking about digital expansion and the savvy KXP shown there, but you've also several times, Ethan mentioned expanding down to the Bay Area. Could you take us inside of that process and that decision making? In particular, I'm curious about why and how you decided on San Francisco as opposed to a lot of other places you might have chosen.
Well, we had been considering the Bay Area for some time actually, and that was based on a number of things, including a really strong audience that we had in the Bay Area for some time, which I think speaks to the the cultural and economic connections between these two West Coast cities. So we had a base already there. And I mentioned earlier also, an awareness at least of some of the great music coming out of the different scenes in Oakland and San Francisco, along with connections into the music communities there as well. And so it had been interesting. Also, there are Multiple, and more than I'm even aware of. I learned of another one last week, streaming only stations coming out of the Bay Area, along with CalX and KLW, who do some great stuff. But also, I think it's fair to say that in terms of commercial music radio, it had become a desert. All of the really amazing, rich, music only, metro wide stations. I mean, the history of radio in the Bay Area is incredible, but for one reason or another, they've gone by the wayside, and so there also was, I think, a vacuum of sorts and a need to fill it with something really good and really interesting in the music space. So that was part of it as well. We're not going to go into a market where there's a really good non-commercial station doing great stuff. There's no reason to do that. But there are other markets in the country that we could might consider for similar reasons. But also there has to be an opportunity. And we looked at KREV, 92.7 KREV. We looked at it. It was on the market maybe 8 or 9 years ago for over $10 million. And we took a look at it then. It's a very modest broadcast signal, like the one we have here in Seattle. And we concluded that the way we were thinking about it, about operationalizing it, was more expensive also, but that price tag was just too high, and so we took a pass. But I learned from our FCC attorney in DC 2 months before it went up for bankruptcy auction that signal was going through a bankruptcy auction, and so we took a look at it, and we ended up getting it for 3.75 million, which if I had to do over again, I would absolutely do. It was a good value, and so that's part of it too. Is opportunism a little bit, and between the broken nature of commercial radio and also this just the state of technology and heading towards digital and streaming, I suspect there will be other opportunities down the road for us or others, to take a different approach to radio that can actually work and build audience. We're going to keep our eyes open. We've been learning a lot from this experience. It's been going great, well enough that it suggests we might want to consider it down the road somewhere if the circumstances are right. But we'll see.
Just between us chickens, what's the next city?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not going to answer that, Greg. It's too speculative right now, but, if you took a look at some of our top markets, in the country, and then also took into consideration which of those top markets really weren't being served directly by their own non-commercial music radio, you might be able to kind of figure it out.
A quick question for you, and just so we're clear for our listeners, KEXP acquired KREV, KREV in San Francisco, I believe last year. Is that correct, Ethan?
Actually, it was about 2.5 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago last November, so about 2.5 years ago. The fellow who had owned KREV owned 5 other stations spread across California and Nevada. He had stopped paying his music licensing fees, which you can't do, and so he lost all of his stations, and they went through a bankruptcy auction in Las Vegas, Nevada, of all places, and so I unexpectedly found myself, spending a night or 2 at the Golden Nugget, going to a bankruptcy auction at the federal courthouse in downtown Las Vegas, which is not something I ever really expected. But there you go.
And is the intention that KREV, adopts the KEXP brand, or will it remain
Yes.
KREV? Like, how is that gonna play out?
It has to have its own separate call letters, and so we changed those to KEXC. So, KREV does not exist, currently anywhere anymore. But we do brand it as KEXP. It is right now primarily a simulcast of our primary broadcast here. We have worked hard, and it is now, I would say, working very well to be able to cut away for underwriting and PSAs, so that when you're in California, you hear Bay Area specific underwriting and PSAs. We also use that same sort of development of our internal technology to be able to cut away for the local shows. So you get California gets Vineland's, the rest of the world gets Audio Oasis. And so because we have that technology, we're able to do more of that, but it's also something that we need to really work through over time and think through and figure out, what the evolution looks like. And so it's possible that we'll stay with primarily a simulcast that ends up getting cross-pollinated with the Bay Area. So for example, our co-host of El Sonido, we have two hosts. One of them is based in the Bay Area. And so that's an example of cross-pollination. And I mentioned earlier our deeper connections now with music scenes in the Bay Area. You're hearing more and more Bay Area bands on the primary broadcast. So that's one direction. Another direction would be to develop more localized programming. And so we'll see. We're actively talking about it and looking at things and trying to figure out answers to those questions, but we're also not rushing ourselves.
So when Ethan goes to Las Vegas, it doesn't stay in Vegas, it gets broadcast around the world.
That's right. There
Okay.
you go.
All right. Uh, what are the lessons you're learning about operating out of 2 places? Pleasant surprises, but also, hard ones that are full of learning.
Probably gets back a little bit to the space I was just talking about, Greg. It is not easy to broadcast from one city to the audience in that city while also speaking to another city,
Mm.
while also speaking to a global audience everywhere. And so we're learning about that. And, this is happening more actively and frequently on the programming side in conversations that I'm not always part of, but it's a constant fine tuning and learning, how best to do that. I think that we're answering the question that it is possible. That was an open question when we started, and a fair question. I think there were a lot of folks in public media kind of scratching their heads, and fair enough. We've got incredible DJs. We have developed a comfort level, as I mentioned earlier, broadcasting from here to the world. So incorporating the Bay Area in a way that is legitimate and authentic, and means something to our audience in the Bay Area. That's a learning experience. So we're very much midway through that. What I will say, in addition to acknowledging that we have a lot to learn yet and a long way to go, is that spin around the Bay remote broadcast that we did last week. That's the second time we've done that, and is one example of many ways we've been showing up in person, and broadcasting in different ways.
Mm.
And I'll just say that we did not know really what to expect when we launched this thing, and I was worried, and I'm not the only one that was worried about how it would be received. And what I find every time I'm there, it's just mind blowing how much energy and enthusiasm and gratefulness there is for us showing up. I mean, it does answer the question of whether or not we could make a difference there, and whether or not there was a vacuum that needed to be filled in a way. And so, I these record stores, the families and kids and just people coming down and saying, "Hey, it grows and grows each time," and it's kind of overwhelming in some ways.
Just in the details there, was Spin Around the Bay Area broadcast globally, or was that
Yeah.
just in the Bay Area?
Yeah, no, it was broadcast globally, and from what I was there at the time, not in Seattle where I am now, but from what I was hearing, our Seattle audience, our global audience loved it. You know what I mean? It's like it's a it's an interesting story, and it's fun and energizing, and it speaks to the sort of extended global family that I think we're creating, where it's a slice of life in one place, but it speaks to everyone in certain ways, and we all share similarities in terms of values and outlook and curiosity and love of music, and so, yeah, it's a great thing.
Well, I love that, and I mean, I think in the same way that, Seattle is a way more interesting story as a place than the Space Needle by itself, which is neat. The Bay Area, is not just Coit Tower and the Golden Gate Bridge, like, so discoverability around music, I think the idea that it would translate to, "Oh, I wanna discover this record shop or this cool neighborhood or this taqueria," I think would be quite compelling to the kinds of
Yeah.
listeners that you tend to draw.
Yeah, well said, Greg. Absolutely 100%, and the record stores in the Bay Area, oh my god, they're fantastic. Also in Seattle, and so it's put a little pressure on us, which I appreciate. Like, why aren't you doing it here? And so I don't know, maybe we should.
You've mentioned the global audience, several times now. Is there a universe where KEXP has a physical presence outside the US?
It's a good question, Ashley. I don't know. It's possible. Chris Kellogg is talking to some of our partners in different parts of the world, including Mexico City. I think that would most likely. I mean, it would not most likely. It would start if it leads to anything. Either it would not be permanent footprint. It would be a partnership with people that we've gotten to know and share, an approach to music and life that's similar to ours, and so I am absolutely not going to overpromise anything, but I would say that there is curiosity in exploring what those partnerships could look like, and what it would mean both in terms of the broadcast, but also how we might show up either periodically at first or potentially, more ambitiously down the road. It's possible.
Very
So
cool.
back home in the United States, it's such an interesting moment for public media, and I'm referring here to the defunding, the federal defunding of public radio and public television. To start off, Ethan, could you explain whether KIXP has been affected by any of those shifts? And then I think we'll have other questions about what that
Yeah,
might
sure.
mean.
We have been affected, is the short answer. The longer answer is that we are not as directly a part of the NPR public media world as most stations. We are not an NPR station, but we did receive, roughly $700,000 a year from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is about, I don't know, 7 or 8% of our operating budget. So it's enough to hurt. It's not debilitating, but certainly it's enough to hurt. Also, I would say everyone in the ecosystem has benefited from their communities and listener bases really stepping up and helping to get through this period, and that's absolutely true for us. Our community has our backs. It's just incredible. The question we're all asking is how long will that last, and what is the glide path to get from where we were to something that is reliably sustainable? And there are a lot of variables out in the world right now. Every time Trump does something stupid and risks the entire global economy over his own goddamn ego, it's like, okay, well, now what's going to happen? All right, well, so, we're all trying to deal with that. And suspect and have heard that there are a lot of public stations out in the world, in the US, that are really struggling right now, that relied for CPB funding in a much greater extent than we do, and don't have the depth of community support to fill that gap. And that's a real problem, and is something to be really concerned about in terms of independent voices, out in the world, which we need more of, not less of.
Is there advice you'd offer to any of those stations that are kind of on the edge?
Well, I think yes, there is. My sense, and I want to be careful here because I don't have the kind of direct experience in these situations to be able to say this with any authority. Um, but I have a sense that in general, I was going to say news, especially, and that's true. But I think there may be different but similar issues on the music side. There was too much reliance on centralized content and too much centralized control. Now, this is not the way anyone would choose to go about getting to a different reality, defunding the entire system. That was done to try to destroy the system. And I think that's obvious. And we will lose stations without a doubt, as I said a minute ago. But the opportunity, and I do think what is happening is for stations to become more independent and to push themselves locally on how to develop talent that can connect with people. I said that at the very beginning. We have DJs who have great personalities and can tell stories and can really connect with people. And that is part of the basis for developing not a listener base, but a community. And so my answer, Greg, is to really be thoughtful about developing your own identity. What do you stand for? Who are you? And if you can answer that question, it's true on the news side as it is on the music side, then what you end up with, if you can answer that question of what you stand for, you end up with, people who wear your t-shirts around or put a sticker on the back of your car, and it becomes immediately identifiable as, oh, there's someone who is part of my community. And if you don't stand for anything, then who the fuck cares what bumper sticker you have on your car?
Yeah, it's funny in talking about this, Ashley and I were saying, the forces that kind of align to destroy public media, careful what you wish for, because you may
Yes,
have just
100%.
uncorked the independence of a whole bunch of people in media and a whole bunch of listeners who are very keen to support the kind of media they want.
Well said. I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, it's a bummer that we're gonna lose a whole bunch of stations.
Yeah.
I think that is gonna happen or is happening and has already happened in some cases. But I have absolutely no doubt that we are gonna come out of this in a much stronger place. And yeah, absolutely, Greg.
When we were prepping for this show, we were talking. Greg and I were talking about how KEXP's sort of funding model, where you have really strong community support, not just in terms of listeners, but people who give money, live events, etc. That's just so much more diversified than most public media. Um, and it sounds like you think that that actually could be a model for other stations as we move into a period where federal funding may not be there.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Well, listen, Ethan, we're close to wrapping up, but Ashley and I had a few lightning round questions we wanted to ask you. So
Uh-oh.
imagine you're sipping your favorite beverage, and we're just throwing these around. Let me start. What is the top billing at your dream music festival?
Well, I mean, that's easy. I did see The Smile when they came through, both in studio and they played at, WAMU Theater. But it's not the same thing as Radiohead. I've never seen Radiohead. I would I would definitely go out of my way to see Radiohead, so that would probably be at the top right now. If Van Morrison wasn't such an asshole personally, he'd be up there too because I love his music so much, but
All right. What's your favorite record store in Seattle?
well, I live in Ballard, and so, I'm at Sonic Boom usually multiple times a week. I love Sonic Boom. I think they do a great job of curating the selection there, for my tastes anyway. But also, I would say Royal Records is relatively new, and it's only a few blocks from where we are here. It there are different models of record stores, and, one is like the huge space, and it's everything, and you gotta sift through it all, and the other is very small and highly curated, and which is what I gravitate toward. But then Royal Records is a pretty big space, and it's also highly curated. It's amazing, and the new used records that they're getting through regularly, fantastic. So I would say Royal Records has to be up there, and also, I think it's Daybreak, in Fremont. That is in the smaller, highly curated space, but also, like, the regular used that they're getting in is so high quality, it's excellent.
What are the music meccas outside of the places where KXP has stations that you think every music lover needs to visit?
Well, I'm not sure I have anything, any sort of revelation to add there. I will say that, our younger son spent a year and a half, his freshman and half his sophomore year in Chicago, and I love that. I mean, it was incredible. Uh, the record stores in Chicago, holy crap! I mean, they're so good, and also just a range of venues and easily accessible venues. Not overpriced, just incredible. So I put Chicago on the list. I haven't been to New Orleans or Nashville in a very long time, and I really want to go to both. So I feel like I've got to shout them out, even though I don't have anything to say about either one of them.
Final question. What is a very cool thing about KEXP that nobody knows?
Oh my god. Well, I don't know. I mean, there are different ways to answer that. If I'd thought about it ahead, I probably could have given you a better answer. I mean, It's a special place, and it's a family here. Also, it's kind of crazy sometimes, as is true with any family, So it's a wild ride, but I think that everyone here understands the importance of what we're doing out in the world, and is leaning in, and we're generally rowing in the same direction in a way that maybe we weren't some time ago, and that feels pretty good. So just the general culture, I hope is true. When you're at the top, it's hard to know, and it's easy to kid yourself. But I would like to think that in general, the culture here is really a good place to be, just day to day, but also feeling good about the role you're playing in the world. So I think that's a big part of the answer, Ashley. The one thing that I will say that cracks me up, and it can also be frustrating and is maybe funny, is that we have pretty intense fights internally over T-shirts on a regular basis. There are very strong feelings about T-shirts. I am regularly in conversations about T-shirts.
I loved our conversation with Ethan, maybe because it highlights how KEXP is a paradox. It's hyper local, rooted in Seattle, and maybe soon from the legendary corner of Haight and Ashbury in San Francisco. It taps into and is shaped by these specific places and communities. And yet, it's global. That's not an accident. It's the model. Because what this conversation suggested to me is that the West Coast cultural influence has never really been about size or scale. It's been about tuning into what's next and inviting the world to listen. And KEXP is doing that in a moment when most of media is drifting in the opposite direction. Radio today is composed of prefabricated playlists, optimized by what you and we tend to like, full of ads designed to reach those very same people. It moves toward sameness, toward average, and away from what might just surprise us or capture our imaginations. What KEXP represents is a different path: human curation over machine prediction, community over passive consumption, culture as something shaped, not scraped. And maybe that's the real takeaway, not just for music, but for the West Coast itself. Because if this region is going to lead in the future, it won't just be through anodyne technology. We have to invite mess, take chances, and be daring to influence culture, even when the mind bending technology we create here steers us to act like robots rather than be human. So here's the question we'll leave you with. In a world where everything is quote unquote personalized, what would it take to make discovery feel alive and shared and more truly human? For Ashley Brown, I'm Greg Amrafel. Thanks for being with us in Pacific Time. You can find us on Substack, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music. And remember that we, like KEXP listeners, are the humans who power the West Coast community. And we'd appreciate it if you could recommend this podcast to your friends and neighbors who care as much as you do, as much as we do. Follow, like, and share. Even better, subscribe to us on Substack and support our work diving into West Coast challenges and opportunities. Let's keep asking the what if questions about the future of the West Coast.